So here we are in the middle of ProQuest season. Zen and Enigma are gone, and Aurora is on her way out. But the excitement in the Flesh and Blood community these last weeks actually came out of an LGS in New Zealand, coming June 7th, an event being run under an in-development pilot format codenamed Project Blue. Now, many in the community have gone absolutely nutso about this, and for good reason. The concept is solid, and it could potentially be FaB's answer to both entry format and short-form play. A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my Flesh and Blood friends. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you so much for tuning in here on your Flesh and Blood Monday as we are talking codename Project Blue. That's right, the potential future of short-form Flesh and Blood, potential future of entry-level Flesh and Blood, maybe all thereof. Very interesting. A lot of people are losing their minds about this, and there's good reason for it. Now, you can see over there on the side, I do kind of have a bullet list format on how I want to approach today's discussion, but there's two main parts of it. The first is Project Blue as it really fits into kind of the current FaB environment as a whole, and why there's a lot of reasons that something like this makes a lot of sense. And then the second part, I actually just want to spend some time talking about the format itself. Right now, it is still being tested, obviously is thus subject to change. And it could, in the end up looking nothing like today. But let's talk about it and why we are likely to see, I think we're likely to see some changes. But that doesn't mean that there's no reason to not be excited about it. And if I'm being honest, the reason I'm most excited about this is because it seems, or at least it appears to be, something that LSS is very passionate about. And they're putting resources into it, right? Even supporting the event with a promo card to get folks out so that they can get reps and tests on it, not from just Discord feedback, right? So I think that in of itself, overall, more than anything else we're going to talk to today, is probably the reason that this is overall a net positive, right? Whether we like it more or less than Blitz, whether we like it more or less than Commoner, the impacts thereof, whatever it may be, the fact that, if we're being honest, they haven't been putting or at least on the surface, right? To those of us on the back end, it doesn't feel that there's been a lot of effort and attention put into Blitz over the last year and a half or so. And if this is something that they're passionate about and want to put resources into, I think that that's a net positive, right? So no matter how it plays in tests, as long as it is something they care about, I think that we're already kind of in a better place. Now, as I kind of mentioned, this is something the community is really already going nuts about, like Ashen Wings, right? Great friend of the channel. He's been on here before. He's a commoner and Clash aficionado, so kind of right up his alley. He's already making content on it. You can see it over here. Now, I do want to say, I do think a lot of the discussions around this is a little premature. I get it. People are excited. Things are new, right? It's kind of like the first time you get into a new card game, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And you're playing a ton, and then, it kind of wanes. And, well, we'll see. Right, we'll see. I myself will not be doing really content focused on it other than talking conceptually about it like now. I won't be really doing any like deck text or anything like that until we actually have kind of a formal announcement. I just know myself, and I only have limited time, and I don't want to put the calories into something that, may or may not materialize. But if you're having fun with it, go nuts, right? It's kind of a Clash light, and that actually, look how I did that. Kind of leads right into the first bullet there is, this is kind of a functional Clash. So let's talk first about, what is Project Blue kind of in a nutshell. So at a very high level, I kind of already spoiled it. It's really Clash light. So it's not really, it's closer to Commoner than it is to Blitz. So it's got, the 55 card deck with it. So it's 55, which is the expanded sideboard, which is very interesting to, some stuff that we've talked about. Okay. But it's got the 40 card deck, which is no more, no less, and 2 of each card, 35-minute rounds, right? So it's short form, it's young heroes, but as of right now, at least my understanding is that the young heroes they have to be rare or less. So your Majestic and your legendary heroes don't fit in, which I think is interesting. So it's very, very similar to Clash. Obviously, kind of, I know I'm going a little off track here, but a lot of folks in the past have reached out. They're like, well, why don't you just play Clash? And I was like, well, first off, I have played Clash, right? I think it's really cool. But my problem, I've always said that I think Clash as it exists better as a fan-made format, because they kind of are like, here's how it works, except for, right? And I think that works really well in a fan-led format where everyone's like, okay, we're going to get on board with the rules committee or whatever it may be. They're in charge, we get it. I don't think that would apply the same globally to the entire community if it was an official format supported by Flesh and Blood. You would have to stick to, LSS would want to likely stick to very stringent rules. And I think that this is basically the best that you could have done. They're going to have to say, this is this. We're not going to make exceptions for specializations and stuff like that. We're not going to call card specs that aren't. We're just going off of what is printed. And I think this is probably the best this is basically the evolution of Clash into the best that it could have been from a formal environment, right? Now, when I said it's not really like Blitz, it's more like Commoner Advanced, right? In terms of the legal formats, I'm saying this is more like a Commoner Advanced, right? It's just kind of upping the game on Commoner. And, when I say that, what I really wanted to do here is kind of cover, so we'll cover there is a very stringent, as you can see, that there's a ban list for it. I don't want to go into the ban list itself until we're talking about the format itself. The concept of having a very stringent, I shouldn't say stringent, but a pretty extensive ban list makes a lot of sense. And I think we can kind of understand why that would be that way. But I think we'll save going through the list itself until we get farther down below. Now, first, let's start. What I wanted to do was kind of look at the formats we have today and where this really fits in with those formats. So Blitz format is, I had said before, and I don't know this to be true anymore, but a couple years back, I had said that Classic Constructed is obviously the better game, but I thought that Blitz was the better format. And what I mean by that, just to be clear before we throw tomatoes at the screen, was that it was much more functional from a LGS standpoint, right? You could run it on a Tuesday night as opposed to having, a 4 or 5 hour block of time. You can run it in 2-3 hours. And that's much more LGS friendly, uses up less effective space, right? So it's more local game store friendly in terms of that execution. Now, the cool thing about Blitz is that all legal cards can be played. Now, obviously, there's a ban list, right? And Heroes LL, which is another interesting thing about how this will apply. And Blitz has always allowed, because of kind of how they've, right, like Enigma New Moon and heroes like that, it's allowed for more creativity, right? I mean, you've got like 10-foot tall Kayo just like trying to swing for the fence, and like that's very cool. There's a lot of players in this game that just cannot handle that concept. But there's also a lot of players who understand that, like, hey, if your buddy sits down and blows you out with an OTK, like wombo, like 1-in-6 type combo, you just fifth bump, shuffle, and go again, right? Now, I know there's a lot of players in this game that can't handle it, but Blitz itself, if you approach it from the right angle, can be very fun from that regard. But to kind of the point I was just talking about, there's a lot of cons in that, the advantage of all the cards can be played is also the disadvantage that all the cards can be played at 20 health at the same power, right? And you also have a disproportionate armor pool. I mean, when you have 20 health on the board and you're a Runeblade, you can sit down with your fridge. That's output damage and sit down with that fridge is pretty crazy, right? Like Aurora, pretty good, right? A Zen sitting down with the 7, pretty good, right? And we've consistently seen that in Blitz. So, because of the focus on the equipment, it's not, you have a half life total. So a lot of folks are like, oh, it should cost half as much, which isn't true. I think most people assume it would cost 2/3 as much, but it doesn't, right? Blitz is not, it does not scale with cost. And that's always been, it's consistently been a complaint I've seen, that people feel like, the Blitz short form format should be a lot cheaper. And, in terms of, probably game time spent per dollar, Blitz is probably more expensive than CC from that ratio standpoint, right? The other cool thing, though, is, Blitz just plays normal, right? It's just, by normal, I mean, like, everybody, actually, it's even more than everybody because you have those additional heroes to which I spoke. Now let's go over to Commoner, which is also an official supported format. the pros here is that this is extremely new player friendly. Very few decks, the most expensive card in the format, I'm pretty sure, is Sink Below at like $3-ish. Pretty stapley though for the format, but it's very entry friendly, right? $10-15 for most decks, not a problem. The other cool thing about this is it's an eternal format. There's no LL system. Aside from bans and stuff like that, your heroes are still playable as long as your heroes are, rare or lower, right? And to say that this next one's a con, it's also a positive depending on your point of view, to be fair. But because the format is so mathematical, there's a lot of folks that think it's boring, right? You don't really have combo explosive turns, which is something a lot of folks enjoy about this game. Use the arsenal slot to set up something super explosive. Really, the closest thing we have to like a combo explosive turn is really utilizing like the Ninja Kitty armor to like do a go wide and then kind of finish, pop, and then pop the resource and then do like a She Unleashed or something. That's kind of the closest we get, or any 2 for 6, whatever, you get my point. 2 for 5 as it may be in the case of Surging Militia. That's kind of the closest we get to a pop-off turn. So a lot of people just don't like that. And then probably the biggest thing, which is why I believe that Clash is so much, the folks that love Clash are so passionate about Clash, is because in Commoner, there's a lot of heroes like Syndra or Boltyn just come to mind right away. They really just lack an identity because of the cards that they're missing. I mean, Syndra is basically unplayable. I mean, she's not unplayable, but she really doesn't do what she wants to do. Boltyn, without Raiden, a lot of the tricks, just doesn't do what it is. So, Clash doing what it did with, the specs inclusion so that heroes could play how the heroes were, at least in theory, designed to be played. There's a lot of value to that as well. And that's, I was kind of already talking about Clash. That's probably the main draw of Clash. The other thing that I think is really cool about Clash, which I already kind of led into it, is I think it's cool that it's fan made, because folks are a little more, I don't necessarily know the psychology of it, but when it's not an official company doing it and it's recognized as a fan format, folks are more okay with things being quote unquote wonky, and they accept it. And basically everything else that's cool about Clash cool about Commoner is also cool about Clash, except that you also get more hero identity. I mean, Clash is really, really, really great. But like I said, with the cons, house-made rules and stuff like that, it's also not technically Armory legal for that very reason. I know a lot of stores out there, I shouldn't say a lot, I know there are some stores out there that do Clash armories. I think that's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell type situation with LSS, right? But it's not technically legal. So that is, another significant con of, that's probably the biggest significant con of Clash. Again, if you're playing it, no one's saying you're wrong, no one's ratting you out, but we all know it's not technically legal, right? So let's bring us to Project Blue then, which we've been talking about. You can see that it kind of fits, really, it takes a lot of those positives from all that we talked about. The only thing it really doesn't have is, kind of the M and L heroes. And I'm sure there's some heroes that, like you look at like a Prism Advent of Thrones, who, to be fair, isn't technically legal in this format anyway, at least as of today. She's not going to really have an identity because they're angels and stuff like that, right? So, you can't have everything. But from a lot of standpoints, this hero is really, really shooting the gap. Now, the other thing I do want to address here from the entry standpoint is there's really always going to be a need, in my opinion. Actually, I know it to be true, that there's always going to be a need for a young hero format in this game. And that's for a couple of reasons. First off, if they were just to say, nope, young heroes are now only used forever for draft and then no one cares after that, they're pretty much invalidating a lot of what they've done before. So I do really believe, and then I think that anyone would fan format stuff anyway. So plus, they invalidate the Emperor, they invalidate New Moon, they invalidate stuff like that they've put out before. I think there will always be a use for, and the Marvels, right? Like all the Marvels that, granted, they're not super expensive anyway, not super high demand, but you completely invalidate all that stuff. And I don't see that as being a decision that they'll make. Plus, the concept of having a short form really does rely on having less health, right? To make the game go faster. Furthermore, this format itself really fits in well with the Blitz decks. So I think it to be true that all Blitz decks out there have rares in them. I think that's true. Some have more than rares in them, to be clear. But I don't think there's any Blitz deck that is a true commoner deck, right? So while, as we've seen from High Seas, they may be discontinuing the Blitz decks going forward. Right? They're not doing the Blitz bundle. We haven't seen any Blitz decks, at least to my knowledge. They're doing the Armory deck instead that can be derated to Blitz. And by derated, like cards pulled out is what I mean. So, maybe that isn't something they're looking at going forward. But the cool thing about this is, again, right, you go pull a Lexi deck off the shelf, right, Tales of Aria deck off the shelf, whatever, and it's playable, right? Now, there's a couple exceptions in there, right? Like the Dromai deck, I think, had Sink Below, which is a ban card. And then you have the Mentors, right, which were EMs. But by and large, I think, you understand what I mean. So again, a lot of really good ideas here. So, again, my initial thoughts here are that this is great. We don't know what the final thing's going to end up with, but I think from, the topic we're talking about now, I think it doesn't matter, because I want to go back to what I said. As long as this is something that they're going to really put resources in, they're going to maintain, they're going to promote, I think it's going to be a good thing. Okay, whatever. I mean, again, we'll get the rest figured out as things evolve over time. Let's get it in place, right? So I'm super excited about this. I really don't have any. The only negative thing I have of it is kind of go into dad mode here for a second, right? We've seen this for a while, and this is, I've given this feedback to Clash folks as well. We can all exist in the same space, right? The implementation of Project Blue doesn't mean that Blitz is getting killed. The implementation of Project Blue doesn't mean that commoners getting killed. I do personally think that probably one day we'll end up getting an announcement to some effect saying, hey, thanks for all your love on Blitz. We're no longer going to be supporting it. I do think that's probably going to happen out of this. I don't know that happens to commoner. I think that them having, even if functionally this and commoner are the same, and I do think that if this goes published as it does today, I think probably commoner does, peter out. But I don't think they necessarily take commoner away, because, the number of resources they put into commoner are so very low. They can switch the gold foil on, calling weekends over to this, but there's no reason to take it away. It'll just exist and be what it is, and probably not very many people will play it. And it'll be a very kitchen table friendly thing, which is kind of how it started anyway. So I think that's fine. But anyway, let me get back to my point here. There seems to be this assumption, and, I actually went to, because I knew that I'm an old man shaking a cloud, right? So what I wanted to do, I actually went to AI as Google AI, and I said, hey, why do folks feel that other things have to, in order for their thing to succeed, why do other folks have to fail? And AI came back with what you see across the screen right now, which is what's called the zero-sum game of the loser's dilemma. And, you can read what's on the screen, but the basic concept, the basic answer of what AI came back and said was that there's this, and AI was very clear that it's false, right? But there is this feeling out there that, well, there's only so many resources, so in order for my thing to win, other folks have to lose. And I think the reason that TCG players kind of fall into that trap from this standpoint is because I do believe that to be true in the TCG space when we're comparing TCGs. Well, people only have $100. Are they going to spend it on Fat Flesh and Blood? Are they going to spend it on Magic or One Piece or whatever the kids, right? So I get that standpoint. And I think that translates over. But, from a standpoint of what's going to make people come out and play Flesh and Blood, I do think that we kind of need to dial back on the attacking each other and trying to hope other people's formats fail and stuff like that. If you enjoy playing something, go play it, right? I enjoy Commoner and I enjoy Blitz, and I've never tried to make somebody not play Clash, right? And I really wish it would go the other way. And I think that with Project Blue coming out and being official, we are going to see shifts and stuff like that. And a lot of people get what they want, and other people can keep doing what they want to do. So that's my dad thing for the day. So thank you for humoring me there. All right, so let's go talk about the format itself. So we can go through the ban list. You see it across the screen right now. I don't know if there's a bunch. Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you know, if you really look at this, it's kind of a combination of basically all the ban lists and all the formats, to be blunt. You see, you know, cash-in's the first one on there. I'm really happy to see CYB on there, but you know, cash-in fits in with the card draw, and it's, you know, of the card draw ones, it's a rare. I think most of the other like card draw ones are M's, so automatically excluded. You see, you know, Belittle. So Plunder Run was banned at one point in Blitz. It's not anymore. You don't see it played very much, but you see Plunder Run, Belittle. Like, it's kind of like if you go down the list, there's, you know, with a few exceptions, there's pretty much like the greatest hits of current or previous ban lists between Blitz and Commoner. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing that is the most surprising is in the second column about midway down, you see Sync and Fader on there, and you also see Flick Flack is on there. So the D-Reacts thing is, I don't personally think these things are going to stick. I do know that there is a feeling in certain parts of the community that Sync Below and stuff needs banned. Now, those folks also seem to have cheered when Shelter from the Storm came out, so wrap your head around that one. But there was a, you know, discussion for a while, and even, you know, James kind of mentioned, he's like, you know, if I could do it again, I wouldn't have done Sync Below. That doesn't mean he wouldn't have done a 0-4 React. He was just talking about Sync Below being a generic, limiting the design space for doing 0-4s, like, you know, say like a take cover, like the Ranger card and stuff like that, right? 0-4 specific for class. That's where my head was on what James meant by that. Not that he didn't want 0-4s to exist, right? And I think people maybe took that a little out of context. And also, I'm very, very concerned with what I think won't work on this is that you have Pummel still legal. And that's always been my fear about taking away your generic 0-4 D-Reacts when you have Pummel, right? So maybe it won't end up being a problem. But one of the, you know, it was Yanji Lee. I had posted at some point a response to Yanji Lee. This is maybe a year change ago. He was talking about why Sync Below should be banned. I was like, I don't know that Sync can be banned unless Pummel is banned. He's like, no, you're wrong. Nobody plays Pummel. And I was like, well, that's kind of, and he was talking competitive meta, right? Which first off is not necessarily applying here. So take that step back to begin with. Then second off is like, yeah, but if, you know, say Fate and Sync didn't exist, wouldn't people be more apt to play Pummel? Was my argument. So that's where I'm going here, right? Is with these gone, and then there are only certain classes that have access to their own inherent 0-4s at this level. Ranger being one of them, Flick Flack being one of them, which is also on the ban list, which is interesting. You do have Springboard Somersault, which you can put in Arsenal, which is not banned, so that's interesting. Anyway, hopefully you see where I'm going with that. I'm a little concerned about the existence of Pummel with the certain things on this ban list, but let's check it out. Things that aren't on here, though, well, it's not that things aren't on here, but let's just go into the next part because I think it fits right in, is the hero identities part, right? You look at someone like a Dromai, I think becomes kind of the poster child for the difference between, well, not just her, but she's a great poster child for the difference between Commoner and Project Blue and or Clash, whatever, right? Her dragons are all rare. Well, she has Majestic dragons too, but she has no common dragons, let's put it that way, right? You're relying really on your Senepais and your Rakes. Now, interestingly enough, Rake is on the ban list, which I think is a really good idea. But she has her dragons now. And I think that's perfect. And there's a lot of other heroes that fall very in that similar vein, right? Boltyn now has V of the Vanguard. He still doesn't have Raiden, which stinks, but he can do hatchets or sabers, right, with V of the Vanguard. And I think that's, and he doesn't have Lumina. And there's a lot of really, really good positives about this. The hero identities part is probably the biggest win out of this. And also, I know I'm going a bit back up to the top, but it's always been a bit, we have to admit, it's always been a bit weird in Commoner that you can use rares in the loadout and the hero, but not in the deck, right? That's always been a little, it's not super confusing once you get it, but you can imagine approaching it from the first time. You're like, oh, well, that's a rare. It's not a common. Well, right. And in this case, it's just blanket blue and gray. And white, I guess, or tokens white. Either way, you get my point. Okay, I think it's really straightforward. It's really easy. And I do, as much as I don't want to see Commoner go away, I do think that eventually this probably, if published as is, if this goes forward as is, I think probably within time, Commoner's probably only like, kitchen table, coffee shop type stuff. And this will be probably what gets played on calling weekends and battle hardened weekends and stuff like that. So, and so be it. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, I don't, I kind of just referred to, it's really nice that everything that's blue or gray or white or black or whatever it may be is legal. However, there's a couple problems with this, and it's the heroes I'm showing here. So, there's the legendary heroes like Emperor, Enigma, and Shiana. And, maybe that's a big deal. Maybe it's not. There is a weird thing about Blaze, right? Because Blaze is only a promo. So she doesn't technically have a rarity, but she doesn't meet the criteria for being legal. And that's a little weird. It's not that I aggressively want Blaze in the format. What's weird about it is she was released as a convention exclusive, which was basically encouraging new folks to go engage with Flesh and Blood at these conventions. So, again, I know she's not being given out today, but imagine under this scenario where they do it again in the future. Hopefully they don't, but if they were to do it again in the future, you go to pick one up and she's not legal in the new entry format, right? So obviously they'd have to, they'd change it or whatever, but that's a little weird. So with that, and then, I kind of already spoke to Advent of Thrones as well earlier. She doesn't really, with all of her angels being M, probably isn't super relevant because you're probably not going to have a lot of success with her anyway. So it probably doesn't matter that she's an M and not legal. But again, it's another hero that's not legal. And then the one I want to finish with actually is Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy is a Majestic rarity hero, not legal in this. And you may remember Dorinthea Quicksilver Prodigy from such things as the 2-player Learn to Play set. So that's not good. Right. And sure, they can always reprint Quick EP as a rare or something like that. Could happen. Would love to see that in a future set. I'd love to see an adult Quick EP. That'd be great. And then she could have the derated. But I think you all pick up what I'm laying down, right? That I don't know that this will last. Even if New Moon's not playable, make her legal. Even if Emperor's not playable, make him legal. Leaving heroes out that you have supported and not only supported, but used to promote product in the past. Again, nothing's going to catch everything. I totally get it. But I do think that that's weird. So hopefully in the final form, whatever it is, it'll be something like any hero legal. Well, any young hero legal, something like that. And to be clear, maybe I'm reading it wrong and they are legal and then we don't even have a problem. And if that's the case, let me know below. And we just saved 5 minutes. So kind of wrapping this up, I really think that the format itself, it will evolve. I mean, I don't think it's perfect. I think the ban list is really cool, but probably will get tweaked. Almost certainly will get tweaked. We will see changes of this before it rolls out, right? Zero question. Folks are already playing it. They're already jamming it. They're providing feedback. We'll see a big tournament with prizes, quote unquote, on the line on June 7th, which will motivate people to come out. This is going to be great. I do think at some point in the future, we're probably going to see an announcement. Once this is announced, some point in the future after that, we'll see some sort of announcement like, hey, thanks for your support, but we're sunsetting, whether it be Blitz or Common or whatever. I don't think you have to do that, but probably it'll come just because folks will be like, well, what about? And they'll get tired of it. So yeah, that's my take. Last thing I wanted to get out of here. I know I put it up first up there, but I'm calling it, so everybody's calling it PJB, Project Blue, and I can't not think peanut butter and jelly. I just can't. Peanut butter jelly time. And I wanted to give a shout out. We actually have a channel member as PJB. So I just think it's funny. So anyway, shout out PJB. Thanks for being a member and thanks for taking the flack on that. So I would love to hear, hopefully as we've been going for almost a half hour now, hopefully you've been giving me your thoughts and stuff as we go. If I can leave us with final thoughts, really excited about this in concept, right? Not necessarily the format as it exists, but I'm really excited about the fact that there's something they are passionate about and want to develop and that things are moving forward. And I think that's the best news out of all of this. I do think there's some places for improvement. I do think there's some challenges. I've outlined those here, but I think that net, as long as this is something that we're going to put resources into and work together to improve, I can't see anything better. So really excited about this. Can't wait to see how it evolves. Probably on the timelines, maybe we get an announcement at Worlds. It's probably about the timeline. I could see that, like Worlds keynote, probably getting some sort of announcement, maybe, right? Something to look forward to. Although we'll be looking forward to the next set of that. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's let the LSL, Legend Story Labs, continue to do their thing. And in the meantime, keep playing, keep having fun. And folks, go Commando.